both my debaters ended early. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up to the audience in just a minute, if we can get the microphones out. But so we've heard two different viewpoints. Quite clearly, one side saying no, and the other side, yes. Companies will leave Ontario. I would say that, in fact, I'll borrow a brand or a motto from the Indigo. The world needs a bit more Canada. Lahav would say our med tech companies are going to leave here, and that's giving the world a bit more Canada. I would say Arun might say maybe Canada should show the way. And so we have two differing viewpoints. I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions of our two combatants. I didn't find that too combative, actually. Pretty passive guys.
It is Canada after all, right?
What's that?
It is Canada after all.
Yeah, I thought the Israeli blood in you would,
I'm here after all.
Yeah, but anyway, so let's have some questions. If a question is directed at one of the debaters, I'm gonna offer the other a chance to weigh in. And then after the question period, we'll go to a formal 5-minute rebuttal on from both of the debaters. Yes, over there.
I'm just reading some of the innovative remarks.
I saw one was actually fake news, right? So
True.
Don't know how to interpret that. Go ahead.
Where I guess statement of the companies will move to areas such as the Bay Area, San Francisco, Boston, etc., and brain drain due to incentives. How would you combat that in stating? How would you try and keep not just the companies but the employers here in Canada, because we do have exceptional talent, and what incentives just besides the dollar amount, because I think there's a lot that Canada can offer them.
So why don't you take the lead, Arun,
Sure.
and then
Sure.
Lahav can do the...
Sure. No, I think it's a great question. It's a question that I've been asked similar questions many, many times. And the generalization of the question really is that we have incredible technical talent in Canada. And unfortunately, we have relatively fewer, medtech in particular, relatively fewer business success stories, and thereby the business talent is relatively limited. And I do think that it's an issue. And however, having said that, we built in Novotech, we built a 100+ people R&D team, which was one of the largest teams in R&D in Canada at the time. And I could tell you that every one of my partners told me that as much as I'm a very good-looking person, that they thought my team was better. And they really respected the team far more than they did, what I was doing. And so to me, it is really about the culture of how you build a culture and how you create an atmosphere where people can say whatever they want to say without any fear. And it's really that simple, in honesty. And I think the Profound story is very similar. I think the culture that we're building is very much an entrepreneur, and people come with ideas, and if they disagree with me or anybody else in the senior level, they are very clear about that. And I think that breeds new ideas. I don't think that Canada has a problem because they are not as smart as somebody else. They have this is just a difference in how you build a culture. So to me, that's really at the end of it. I do think that there are certain types of specific knowledge that you need. So for example, if we're looking at reimbursement, I think the world in the United States is very different than Canada. And for that, we do have to hire in the United States. But the same rule applies in China or Japan, that if we're looking for certain explicit talent that is related to the country's policies, then you have to do that. But except for that, I don't see a problem.
Vahav.
Okay, I'm gonna try here. Well, we talked about this on the phone.
Yes.
I actually agree with a lot of what Arun is saying, and I'd like to see companies develop the strategies to actually stay here or leave a component of the company here. There's no, but I'm gonna try to argue against here. So I'm gonna argue that the system that will eventually find a way to pinpoint the outcome value of a specific technology. And I'm assuming that one day they will find a way. They'll analyze enough data. Today it seems far, but the system that one day will find the way to do that and will be able to pinpoint the outcome potential or the outcome participation of a very specific slender piece of technology inside the chain of treatment, that system is not going to be the same, that system is not necessarily going to incentivize companies to basically leave a large contingent here. The companies will eventually have to migrate to where and this is, unfortunately, this is the capitalistic model, and I said I was a skeptic, will have to migrate to where the capital is, and then I would put forward the argument that if a company originated here and eventually ended up doing most of its business elsewhere, then it has actually practically moved, and it's not really here anymore. That would be my argument.
Any other, David?
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand a little bit Lahav's position, and I think I'm understanding where you're coming from now, from the point of view that can you bottle innovation? Can you target the specific need? Is that really where exciting things come from in terms of real change and innovation in healthcare? I think you're kind of challenging that concept. It's almost like we can see if we had just this, it would solve. I think you're kind of saying, we have to be creative. We have to come up with things. We have to go where we have to go. But my question to you is that how do we get that culture going? How do we, and I would argue that you want to see that happen to people and have them stay and see that happened to someone else and then they stay, and then you get a critical mass of people who are challenging and then driving forward, because we know already that if you don't have expertise to help run business, the businesses aren't as successful. So I think you'd like to have a paradigm where you can still have that creativity, not driven by I see one specific problem. If you make this, the outcomes will be better. That's a very engineered, structured approach, but you still want that creative milieu. But that creative milieu will depend on having real skills, on entrepreneurial skills, and if they all leave, then we never hit the critical mass of those skills. So I think it's important that they stay and we build up that density. So I just want, is that where you're going, Lahav?
A little bit. I have to admit that it's the difficult part of a debate is that you're supposed to come up with contrasting answers, and that makes the listening process is very limited. Stephen Covey once said that most people listen to answer rather than listen to understand, and I'm kind of trying to do both, whilst knowing that I have to respond somehow, just to play by the rules here and to give the entertainment piece. So if I just go inward into myself and just try to answer very honestly from my experience as an innovator, mostly. First, I have to say this, I hear so much people here in Canada saying this thing about Canadians, and I include myself in, although I'm a newcomer here, I'm 17 years in Canada, and still debating whether I'm Israeli, Canadian, or whether it even matters. I actually believe Canadians are very good risk takers. I've worked with daring clinicians, brave business people, risk-taking engineers. Like, that's the culture I work with. I've been in that culture for 15 years, and I'm sure Arun the same, and this room is full of people who are risk-takers. So we're not talking about the banking industry, right, that makes its business from being conservative. We are talking about a milieu of people who are risk-takers. So I don't see that deficiency in Canada. Actually, I really don't. I would, allow me to disagree with that notion. Canadians should change the view of themselves. We should change our view of ourselves and accept the fact that there's a huge risk-taking culture here, a healthy risk-taking culture here. And at all levels of the inputs that are necessary in order to commercialize and create impact from clinical and scientific ideas. I would like to propose the idea that invention, innovation, creativity are very natural processes of the individual. Go to the kindergarten and we become very good at stopping that process, putting restrictions on that process. But it's a natural state of being. And that's why I'd like to find a new paradigm that detaches the incentive to innovate from the money-making machine, which is part of the monetary economics or the capitalistic economics. I don't buy into that concept. Long term, I think that 4,000 years from now, if there will be a something here, historians will look back at the 1,000 years that we are at, and they will conclude that we have been swept aside by capitalism on our road to a more enlightened economic view. And this is just like we're on a side road. To us, it looks very, very big because we're in it. But I think we will find a more enlightened concept for economics. I don't know what it is. I don't have an answer. I've learned over the years in the process of innovation, you don't need to have an answer in order to voice the fact that you don't agree with what something is right now. And I would say that we don't fully understand what's going on right now. And I would almost say that my feeling is that value-based billing is almost like a knee-jerk reaction to a problem that is not yet fully understood. I would like to spend, as a species, as a community, as a species, I'd like to spend a little bit more of those 50 minutes that Einstein talks about to truly understand what our problem is before we quickly conclude that we're going to solve it with business practices in medtech or in health tech. That's kind of my...
So this has turned into a Canadian debate where the two are now starting to agree and even love each other. We've even created heaven. We've even created a heaven on earth. So Arun, I'll let you try to rebut, the creation of utopia, but go ahead.
I'm just kind of getting worried a little bit because I think what Lihaf is talking about is so deep, and I think people can get very excited about what you're saying about that future vision. So don't talk about it too much, Lihaf.
let's commoditize it and start selling it.
That's a great idea. So, I think I want to talk a little bit more about value-based healthcare in terms of switching sides and taking Lihaf's side a little bit. And I think that value-based healthcare can be quite dangerous for startups. And one of the things, for example, that I'm seeing is
we
that
talked about this on the phone.
Yeah,
just
we would
so you
switch
know.
sides. So I'm going to switch sides now. One of the things that I'm starting to see, and you hear this from the big companies. So, for example, Medtronic is going to hospital, and they're saying, I'm going to commit to you that you can use my drug-eluting stent. And if you use my drug-eluting stent, I will come up with a measure of outcomes, and I'm going to guarantee certain outcome and so on. Oh, and by the way, if I go do that for you, you buy 5 of my dog products along with it. You see this story? Because what they're saying is, well, if I have a value-based idea, I can get all of my publicity with that value-based idea, and I have 5 dog products that nobody is going to buy, so I'm going to use it as a capitalist, to your point. I'm going to use this as a capitalist to bundle all of this together into a package, right? Now, me, little guy, I'm going there and saying, well, I have this new product, and let me show you how it will save money and so on. And they're saying, well, okay, but these big guys will save me bigger money. It's not in the same area as you are, but I'll buy their dog instead of your value-based product, because their value-based product is a very big product also. You see what I'm saying? So the real world is very different. So I think, Liav, you got some great arguments on your side also here.
One here and
Please.
then one there.
Well, now it's getting into.
I don't know which side, I don't know which one is gonna
Yeah, exactly.
answer.
Now it's getting a debate, but I'd like to throw another piece of idea here. Well, I haven't heard anyone, and I work now for the government for 2.5 years,
Yes.
and I'm struggling to understand. Maybe government can mess up things by pushing too far with the value-based healthcare. An example being that we started in Estonia with the help of the World Bank and found out that for hypertension patients, 80% of outpatient visits in a hospital by specialists are unavoidable. So do not create value.
Yeah.
So coming back to this creative destruction point. So if the government would really say that, okay, well, these 80% of visits to cardiologists, we will not pay for them because they do not create any value. What do you think that will do with the whole system if this kind of approach would be taken? And all the companies who have carefully, helped those cardiologists with decision support systems actually become obsolete because they are in the wrong part of the value chain, because the value is not generated there but somewhere elsewhere. So what is your advice to the government? I don't know which side you will take in order to stay in Ontario and I hope also in Estonia.
Sure. Do you want to start or you want me to?
I can respond. In
Sure,
some-
go
some-
for it. Please.
So first, I want to say my appreciation to the honest voice of government, the ability to ask a question and to say I don't know, and it's come again and again throughout this day, an honest voice of not knowing an answer, and I think that is a very healthy point for innovation, is that people, individual people, companies, and large organizations and government are able to, without fear, admit that we do not know, and we do not have to make like we do know, okay? Because that is one of the biggest deterrents of innovation, is that we're all afraid to show that we don't know. And if we begin by accepting the fact that we don't know, that we're in a beginning of something new, we've got all these enabling technologies, we've got a lot of enabling awareness. I think that's one of the biggest difference alongside enabling technologies, is that we live in an era where we have an enabling awareness. It didn't exist a few years ago, and it's continuing and continue. And the acknowledgement, the ability to embrace the idea that we don't know, we're looking for questions, we're not pretending to know. I'm very distressed by the fact that still today we're so inundated by ideas that came through in the Industrial Revolution, and they really don't belong anymore. We're still working with this idea of efficiency above everything, scale above everything. I really don't have the answers, but I know that we are tasked to change our views. And I know I didn't yet answer to you. The short version now of my answer is that if we attempt to generalize healthcare, we're already committing a huge mistake. Okay, it's very case specific. And you've described a case, so we need to put on the overalls, who was mentioned before, and not be afraid of the work. Governments, knowledge institutions, industry, everybody needs to be willing to put the effort it takes to explore things on a case-by-case basis, if that's what's needed. And policy should be smart enough to address case by case if it needs to. if it cannot address if you cannot address with blankets successfully, we need to be doing that, I believe. That's my answer.
So here's what I'm going to do. Last few minutes, 2 minutes each, last rebuttal, then a vote. And then I know there's some other questions, but we have the post-debate sort of discussion, and a lot of those questions will come up. So Arun, give us our last 2 minutes rebuttal,
Sure.
your position.
So I guess I don't know
Which,
what my
by the way,
position
is
either.
yes, by the
So,
way.
okay.
Change the wondering.
I'm in the same spot.
Well, you know, I think my final comments, and I'll address your point in that as well. You know, to me, value-based is just one more new thing that is on the horizon. And I think at the end of the day, we have to recognize that we're treating life and patients and human beings, and making changes that are drastic in that environment is just not the answer to things. And so I personally am a fan of pilot programs. We're scientists when we start our lives in this world. And I'm a fan of pilot programs where the government could put pilot programs in place on certain specific things, so that, you know, not everything belongs in value-based healthcare. There is infrastructure. There are certain types of things that you need no matter what treatment you're doing. And those things are infrastructure related. The value-based is not going to apply to them. But that if we can create, and Ontario could lead that kind of effort, where pilot programs are put in place, we learn from those experiences and we build on it. And I think to the point that you know, Liaf has been making also, is that we can build a critical mass. I think that the bigger issues in my mind regarding medtech in Canada is the critical mass issue, is how can we create the critical mass that allows us to maintain a bigger thriving industry here. As compared to your point, I think that most of us have been certainly been offered these options where someone VC from Boston or San Francisco or Bay Area is going to dangle, you know, a check for $30 million, say, you move over there and you can have it. And if you don't move, then you don't have it.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of where you are coming from,
That's great.
is that this critical mass is not here. And if we can create the critical mass, we can do value-based healthcare like anybody else can, probably better, in my opinion, better than anybody can. And I guess that's my closing
Vahav.
point.
I'll
Last
just
2
join
minutes.
in here. I think Arun is talking about a culture and about the people who build, the people who create a continuous innovation cycle. And if that culture embraces and creates policies where failure becomes a thing we celebrate, and not even carefully. So like, what do you do when you run a startup, believing that you've got something great to offer the world, some impact to offer into clinical practice, and after 2 or 3 years burning $15 or $17 or $33 million, you discover that it's not the case. I think that's a legitimate discovery. And then that team, how do you work with that team, with that burn, with those investors, with the Shell Corporation that's already out there, IPO'd? So if we manage to rethink some of these models, then we will have a lot more to offer here, and maybe we'll be less scared to be Canadian. That's
Okay. Scared to be Canadian.
less scared to be.
Okay, so let's have the final vote. So just to recall, the pre-vote was 83% yes, and 17% no. Arun, for most of the time, was yes, 83%, and no, 17%. That was the pre.
Why is it moving like crazy all the time?
Wow.
So what
Will MedTech, I'll read the question. Will MedTech companies stay in Ontario if outcomes-based care is adopted? Wow,
Well,
pretty
congratulations,
definitive
you're
change of events. And I'm surprised.
That's
It's
pretty-
like the American election.
Not sure I want the comparison here.
So thanks to the debaters. Thank you.
Very nice.